One thing that I have found really fascinating about this election cycle is the stark difference between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren's bases of support. You would think that there's going to be a lot of overlap there, but there's not much in actuality, which is a little bit strange. So Bernie Sanders has, a more racially diverse, lower socioeconomic base of support, and Elizabeth Warren has more wealthy, college educated whites who support her. And that's not the one thing that has surprised me, about this election cycle. The fact that numerous polls indicate that Bernie Sanders is the second choice of Biden supporters is also perplexing. So people, sometimes you can rationalize the way that they come to conclusions. Other times I'm left speechless. So it's why I really enjoy segments where we just see people interview voters. I think that's important. Yes, these are anecdotes, but whenever I see Allison Camerata talk to a panel of voters in Iowa on CNN, whenever I see Emma Vigeland of Rebel HQ go out and talk to Trump supporters, or, Amy Klobuchar supporters, I always find these incredibly fascinating because if you don't talk to people, then you're not really going to understand the way that they're thinking, and that's going to make it more difficult to sell Bernie Sanders to them. So I think that we need to be engaging with people who we wouldn't normally engage with because we need to talk to them to find common ground, to figure out ways to sell the policies of Bernie Sanders to them so we can win. Now, one thing that Emma did recently on Rebel HQ, she talked to Warren supporters about why they're choosing Warren over Bernie Sanders, something that I absolutely am curious about. And I'm here to kind of give you my reaction here because I think that this is interesting. I don't know fully what to expect when you compare Warren supporters with other candidates. If you talk to Joe Biden supporters, I wouldn't expect much policy substance. If you talk to Donald Trump supporters, I would expect sheer lunacy. But if you talk to Elizabeth Warren supporters, I would guess it's a mixed bag. So Emma is going to talk to them, and we will watch.
Senator Elizabeth Warren has filled out this Washington Square Park rally here in New York City. There's so many people here. Her popularity just keeps growing and growing. So I wanted to ask her supporters, why her? Why not?
Let me just pause it real quick because that note about her popularity, it scares me. Elizabeth Warren has a lot of momentum now, and when you look at aggregate polling data, Real Clear Politics averages, her and Bernie are in a statistical tie. She just is starting to pass him. So Bernie, I feel like he's doing pretty much everything right. I think he should be harsher when he attacks Biden, but he keeps releasing these policies and Elizabeth Warren still is gaining momentum. Part of that may have to do with the fact that the mainstream media loves her, but either way, this is something that we need to acknowledge and be cognizant of. I don't think people should bury their heads in the sand and think, well, you know what, this is just one point in time, that'll change. We need to take this seriously because this is a fight for our lives. And if you're watching this show, you're politically savvy enough to know that there are stark, strong, significant differences between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. So just keep that in mind. But I digress.
Sanders, if it's really just on policy, those two are closest. So why support her over the further left, more democratic socialist version in Bernie?
I think Bernie's message kind of resonated with everyone at first, and she can kind of carry the torch farther than he can with others, different demographics and supporters and things like that. So I think she has a more of electability factor than Bernie does this time.
So that doesn't make sense to me because Elizabeth Warren's base is more white. Bernie's is more multiracial. Now, back in 2016, when Bernie Sanders didn't have a lot of name recognition, there were political analysts that said this was a problem for Bernie. Now, this guy is just a normal person, so I don't want to harp on him too much. But to see her as more electable is interesting because I do not view Elizabeth Warren as more electable than Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, I believe, is the most electable candidate against Donald Trump. And I say this because of that anti-establishment appeal. I think he would do really well in the Rust Belt. When you look at head-to-head matchups between Bernie and Trump in the Rust Belt, it looks good. So I'm not going to say that it's a sure bet, but he's our best bet. And when it comes to Elizabeth Warren, if you pit her against Donald Trump, I think she can beat him, but my confidence goes down substantially. I think it's more of a toss-up. I think that maybe she'd be the favorite, but it's not going to be an easy race. I think Biden would basically be a sure bet that we lose to Donald Trump. Warren, I think it's more 50-50. Bernie, I think he's our best shot, but we'll continue.
I got into Elizabeth Warren a long time ago. If you remember in '08, the housing crisis in California, we lost our home, including everybody on my row in Sacramento, California, along with rows and rows of homes. And I couldn't understand it. I was still in high school, so I didn't understand why we lost our home, but they just said, the recession, right? So as I got older, I got some researching, and I saw her and how she's been fighting and screaming at the top of her lungs about why we're going to a recession, how this can bankrupt American families, and at the end of the day, what we can do about it. So then she ran for Senate, and then she's been out there being the voice of what I really have been going through. So I believe in her in my heart and soul. I understand the Bernie supporters, I get them. But Elizabeth is my heart and soul because I feel like she's really speaking to what I've been through. And I'm still a capitalist. I still believe in markets, but I believe in rules and regulations. Like everything she believes in, I really do believe in.
I like Senator Warren.
Okay, so that person right there is kind of who I would envision as someone, as for the reasons why they'd support Warren over Bernie. And I don't think that you can persuasively argue that Bernie is better for that individual. He personally likes Elizabeth Warren, and I think that the instinct, if you're a Bernie supporter, and you're probably to the left of him, would think, well, I have to convince him on policies X, Y, and Z, why Bernie is stronger here. I think that's a waste of energy. I think that what we need to do is go after people who are not as certain, who don't necessarily know about the differences between Bernie Sanders. And if somebody knows that Elizabeth Warren is a capitalist to her core, and maybe she doesn't want to blow up the game, but just change the rules a little bit, that's going to be difficult to argue against. So I wouldn't dedicate my time just if I had a family member like this. I would if I had a family member, because I argue with anyone in my family. But if you know a friend like this, I think your time is better spent going after people who aren't already committed, because it's going to be very difficult to get someone like that to budge. You can make the case, yeah, capitalism sucks, democratic socialism or social democracy, that's the way to go, but you're not going to convince them, in that short amount of time. We have a finite amount of time. Why is that so hard to say? So I think that it's really important for us to focus on the gettable people, and I just feel like that person is not gettable. He has his reasons, and I think at that point we just have to respect him and move on to the next person and try to woo them.
She has, her slogan is, I have a plan for everything, but also she talked about getting rid of the filibuster, which I think is very important, because nothing will be passed if you don't get rid of the filibuster,
Okay, I gotta stop it, because, again, this is hard to argue against if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter. I disagree with him on the filibuster. And I also disagree with him when it comes to court packing. So those are the only two areas where you can say realistically that Elizabeth Warren outflanks him to the left. So I don't know how to argue against that, because I technically agree more with Warren here, although Bernie Sanders did kind of give me a little bit more confidence when he said that he would use budget reconciliation to get just a 50+1 vote to pass policies like Medicare for all. But ideally, I think that, look, if we get rid of the filibuster, is that a risk? Yes, but it's a risk that I think we need to take, right? Because Republicans will do it. So there's no reason why we should continue to impose this hurdle on ourselves when we need to pass these policies. So that is a good reason to cite there. When it comes to why she supports Warren over Bernie, I would argue that policy is more important, but it's hard to argue against there. So this is why I wanted to talk about this, because I think that this is interesting. We need to be constructing ways to respond, because this isn't we're arguing with Hillary Clinton supporters where they love her hair, or they love that she's a woman. We're talking with people who I think are more politically astute, generally speaking. It's difficult to generalize a whole block of voters, but these people seem to know more what they're talking about. So we need to arm ourselves with a little bit of knowledge about where they're coming from, because I want to convince them, and we're not going to be able to convince all of them. It's just a matter of who can we convince.
Have enough votes in the Senate to get anything passed, and I just think she's so smart and she's awesome. I just love her.
I like Bernie too.
Bernie's awesome too, so
I think a great ticket would be her and Bernie, but that's too much to ask.
Bernie, why are you here at this Elizabeth Warren rally?
That is legitimately creepy, and it makes me feel uneasy.
All right, should be campaigning.
That
Get
is
back to it.
creepy.
She's not my candidate yet, 100%. I like Pete Buttigieg, but I like her. I like that she has a plan.
A plan? I like Pete Buttigieg. Okay, now we're getting into some shaky territory here.
All right. So it's between her and Pete Buttigieg.
Oh yeah, but also maybe even Amy Klobuchar and Cory Booker. I'm not even close to picking one person yet. But if
Okay, I have to stop it. Oh my god, how? How are you not close? And look, I get it. These people are not glued to politics like me. So I'm trying to sympathize with them from that perspective. But at the same time, I mean, Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren are so different to kind of waver on who you want. It's like you don't have a concrete political ideology picked out for you. I don't know. I don't know what factors she's considering, but I kind of shot myself in the foot by preemptively saying that these are more educated people, because she doesn't seem as educated or politically astute. So I'm eating my own words now, but let's let her continue here.
I'm going to go for somebody like on the left side of the spectrum, it's going to be Elizabeth Warren as opposed to any of the others like Bernie or anybody like that.
So why not Bernie?
It's time for a woman is all. I mean, Bernie's over and done. Didn't do it the last time. Elizabeth has more energy. I think she's got more intelligence. So
I think more.
Okay, when you start resorting to someone's energy and intelligence, then you're just grasping. And it seems like she's more like moderate with the way that she said, if I'm going to go for anyone left, it's going to be Elizabeth Warren. So it seems like maybe the fact that Elizabeth Warren is further to the right than Bernie, even if it's marginally, maybe that's something that appeals to her. This is tricky, guys.
Can relate to her, and I like that she's a woman.
Bernie shirt right there.
And she's very smart. She's very sharp. I mean,
So is Bernie.
I'm not sure any of them are quite as smart as she is.
Bernie's a great guy, and he's fought really hard, but I just don't think that people are going to elect someone of that age, unfortunately. And it would be great to see a woman president. I think that this country elected Barack Obama, the first African-American president. We can't elect the first woman. I think that's where this country needs to go.
Okay. So that was depressing and soul-crushing, because it's like... And I mean, these are people at a Warren rally, so they're the most energetic about the candidate that they support. But, I just feel like we have this one unique opportunity. There's only one Bernie Sanders. There's only one person who's saying, I'm not just going to tweak the rules. We're blowing up the game. And it just feels like, people don't grasp that. Maybe they're not looking at this holistically. I don't know what it is. But, this is definitely... We're playing on expert level difficulty here. Back in 2016, we can go toe-to-toe with Hillary supporters, and 9 times out of 10, they really didn't have a legitimate reason to support Hillary Clinton, even, from their own perspectives. Like, Hillary was just bad on a lot of policies. Elizabeth Warren is no Hillary Clinton. She's no Bernie, but she's no Hillary. So it's more difficult to kind of, argue against Elizabeth Warren here from the perspective of, being a Bernie Sanders supporter. And I want people to understand that to those of us who are engaged in politics, who follow this religiously, if you're watching this video, you follow politics in the 2020 election religiously, when we talk about the differences between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, it's obvious. But to normal people, just average political consumers, it feels like we're splitting hairs. And this is kind of the experience that I've had in talking with Warren supporters who I know personally. They can't understand, Mike, why would you support, Bernie over Warren when they're the same, and you can also, get a woman president? Now, of course, I run through my entire list. You already know the same shit that I say. It's the same shit that I say on the podcast. It's just a matter of how we pitch it. And it's tough. When you see Bernie and Warren head to head, you do have to draw these distinctions. But I've made this point before, and I think it's important for us to kind of go after Warren now when Biden is still in the race. Like, if Biden wins, who's still the biggest threat, we're all fucked. Bernie and Warren supporters. And I don't think that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren should aim at each other, because if they start driving down each other's support, then Biden could potentially get a boost, or some other corporatist like Kamala could rise again, or Pete Buttigieg. So we're kind of in this weird situation at this point in time. Maybe this will change. I mean, these poll results, they're a good indicator of where people are at. But, you know, this can change, right? So I don't know, but I think that this was interesting. And I hope that people will listen to voters and try to figure out ways to just argue for their candidate. Now, there's one other video that I want to play from Emma Vigeland where she asks, do Warren supporters like Bernie?
Part one is attack the corruption head on. Part two is
now this is from June, by the way, but nonetheless, same theme.
And part three, let's protect our democracy.
Let's not do big fundraisers in the general then, maybe?
Warren rally in Miami the day before she's set to take the stage in the first Democratic debate. What's interesting to me is that Elizabeth Warren seems to have the support of many establishment-minded voters.
Yeah.
Third Way said they'd be okay with her, although I think that's the minority, and also progressive-minded voters. So she's bringing these two groups together. Why is that? And if Elizabeth Warren isn't the nominee, who would these Warren supporters back instead?
And this is a good question.
Warren, your number one candidate, would you say?
I would say she's in my top two.
Who's the other one? Can I guess? Is it Bernie Sanders?
No, not Bernie. Kamala Harris.
Oh my God!
Between her and Elizabeth
You're fucking
Warren.
killing me.
Would probably be Kamala Harris.
What?
I kind of want to learn more about the other candidates.
And this was from June, mind you, but
I want to learn more about Yang.
So by my
this was before
Elizabeth
Tulsi
Warren
crushed
is the second
Kamala.
most progressive candidate in the race after Bernie Sanders. So I was curious to find that a lot of the supporters here aren't considering Bernie Sanders as their second or third choice candidate, and in fact don't like him at all in some instances.
The 2016 election was so divisive and tore apart the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and that is part of the reason that we have Trump in the White House. And I just think that it's really it's just not the right time. We've got to get rid of Trump in power, and I don't believe that having Bernie in the mix is a good thing for the party.
I'm a supporter of Elizabeth Warren. I'm actively donating to her and to Bernie Sanders. I think those are the only two candidates right now that are representing quality values in Americans, the young people, against corruption, standing up against corruption, the big corporations that are polluting the environment and just running over all our industries, exporting our workers overseas, and just keeping all the profits for themselves.
I don't understand where the discrepancy comes in. I mean, it could be that Warren is a registered Democrat or Warren is a woman. I don't know. I don't think people, when they say that they don't like Bernie Sanders but they like Elizabeth Warren, I don't think there's a lot of substance to that. I think maybe they are unaware of how close on the issues they actually are.
A lot of people would say that Bernie Sanders is closest to Elizabeth Warren on policy. He's not in your top three considerations?
Why?
What happened in like the previous, presidential run? I was for him for a while, but I feel that his values are a little too extreme for me.
If Bernie's looking like he's going to lose to Biden, then I'll definitely have to switch support to Bernie.
Can you explain why it's between Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren?
Yeah, so I think it comes back to the similar reasons why I was a big Hillary supporter. I was raised by a single mom, and I guess through the eyes of my mom, I kind of understood the unfair struggles that women have to go through, especially in a world dominated by men.
It's about opportunity.
So you opt for Hillary Clinton, who likes to bomb women in the Middle East and North Africa. Cool. Okay, I'm being a dick. A lot of Elizabeth Warren's base, it seems like there's a lot of overlap with Hillary Clinton's base. And, it's really difficult to break down, human psychology here and why policy isn't the utmost concern for you in this primary, especially if you're a Democratic Party voter. They're thinking about electability. They're thinking about 2016. You know, it's a lot. It's a lot to take in if you are a Bernie Sanders supporter. But look, we've got a long way to go. So I don't want you to feel depressed. I don't want you to feel demoralized. Anything can happen in this race. Things change constantly, and they'll probably change 10 times until we actually see the results in Iowa, which I believe is February 3rd. So kudos to Emma Vigeland for doing these. I always find these incredibly fascinating. It's nice to pick the brains of voters. It's important. Again, these are anecdotes, but it's nice to kind of step away from like the numbers. You can look at aggregate polling data, and that gives you a lot of really important information. But it really is important, I think, to kind of dive a little bit deeper and talk to people and ask them, you know, if they're outside of our bubble, why do you not support Bernie Sanders? If you are a Democratic Party voter, you're presumably a left-winger, why opt for someone who is essentially a centrist and, you know, Kamala Harris? So it's all incredibly important. I just wanted to share my reaction. We've got our work cut out for us, but it's not over yet, folks, so don't get too discouraged.